I just want to go into what's been happening to you personally. Have you been doing, are you doing deals? What's been going on with you?
Oh, I've been doing a little bit of just personal investing, but mostly I've been on a book tour.
Well, that's great because a lot of people don't know you can have a career in distressed investing, in turnarounds. Like it's not on most curriculums, even in business school. So how is your memoir?
Yes, well, it's not just for young people, as you know. It covers my whole life, and what it uses is anecdotes of some of the interesting characters I've had dealings with, and tries to draw from them conclusions, recommendations that could help people at whatever stage they are.
Yeah. You used to be a Democrat, coming from New York. What are Democrats doing now besides just, shouting about how bad Elon Musk is, not focused in on, hey, they found all this fraud? What a great thing, right?
They really thought they were going to win the election. So the first shock they've had to adjust to is simply the fact of it now being Trump 2.0. So they were not even recovering from that.
Let's talk about border security and then talk about the wars around the world and what Trump is doing. Hello there, M&A Advisor community. This is Roger Aguinaldo, and welcome back to the M&A Advisor podcast. Since 1998, the M&A Advisor's mission is to recognize achievements, provide thought leadership, and connect professionals in mergers and acquisitions for the purpose of improving your deal-making craft and accelerating your deal flow. We are so glad you're joining us for this insightful and inspiring podcast conversation curated for mergers and acquisitions professionals. Whether you're an aspiring deal maker, a seasoned professional, or just curious about the world of mergers and acquisitions, you'll find something valuable and relevant in our podcast. Our goal is to bring you the best insights, stories, and tips from the experts who've been there and done that, so you can learn from their successes and mistakes and take your deal-making skills to the next level. But before we dive into today's episode, we have a small favor to ask you. If you enjoy listening to our podcast and find it useful, please consider following us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and subscribing to our M&A Alerts newsletter. You can find the links in the description below. This will help us reach more people like you and grow our community of M&A professionals. It will also let us know that you appreciate our work and want us to keep producing more quality content for you. Plus, you'll never miss an episode, and you'll always be in the loop with the latest trends in the M&A world to improve and accelerate your deal making. So please follow us. You are the reason we do what we do, and we couldn't do it without you. And now for today's podcast. Hello, M&A Advisor community. Welcome to the M&A Advisor podcast. I'm Roger Aguinaldo, the founder and CEO of the M&A Advisor. The M&A Advisor is the preeminent organization that recognizes excellence, honors achievement, presents thought leadership, and facilitates connections among the world's leading mergers and acquisitions, restructuring, and deal-making professionals. Join me as I talk to the best of the best in the M&A distressed investing, restructuring, and finance industry. Stay on the edge of your seat, so this is going to be extraordinary. Today on our show, we are proud to welcome back an esteemed industry leader and a Hall of Famer, a Lifetime Achievement Award recipient of the M&A Advisor Awards, who was on the show last year. But first, of course, let me introduce him again. Welcome, Wilbur Ross, to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Roger. It's good to be back on with you.
For those of you who do not know Wilbur, let me just remind you a little bit of his background. Wilbur is a former U.S. Secretary of Commerce under the first Trump administration. Wilbur was in finance and investment banking for over 25 plus years at Rothschild Inc., where he specialized in bankruptcy, restructuring, and M&A. He also founded W.L. Ross and Company, a private equity firm focused on restructuring and turnarounds until he was initiated serve in the government in the U.S. Department of Commerce. He earned his bachelor's degree in business administration from Yale and holds an MBA from Harvard Business School. Wilbur Ross's name is known also for his wealth and philanthropy, supporting various charitable causes and cultural institutions. And for leisure, he enjoys, I don't know if you still enjoy yacht racing, and you still own several sailing vessels. We'll certainly possibly get into that. Wilbur certainly is a longtime friend and supporter of the M&A Advisor since his humble beginnings. If you want to go into all of that, that's in his current memoir, which came out, Wilbur Ross's Risks and Returns. In our podcast last year, we covered, the beginnings of his career, how he got into M&A and distressed investing, and why he was tremendously deserving of the M&A Advisor's Lifetime Achievement Award and inducted into our prestigious Hall of Fame. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to welcome back to the M&A Advisor podcast, Wilbur Ross. Wilbur, great to have you with us.
Thanks, Roger. Good to see you again.
Wilbur, before we go into, listen, we got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about, Trump 2.0. We're going to talk about the tariffs, border security, sort of the turnaround of the government, if you will, right? That's your sort of where you
Right.
Kind of began, or was made a name for you in your career. I just want to go into what's been happening to you personally. Have you been doing? Are you doing deals? What's been going on with you?
Oh, I've been doing a little bit of just personal investing, but mostly I've been on a book tour. We've done about 70 book signings so far, and I have a couple more scheduled in the immediate future. One at Southern Methodist University. They've taken 425 books for the students at this Cox School, and I'm very, very pleased with that, because the Yale School of Management had earlier taken some, and so had Harvard for their undergraduate course in entrepreneurship. So
Wow.
What part of my purpose, as you know, with the book was to be inspirational and give some advice to people at whatever stage of career they may happen to be.
Well, that's great, because a lot of people don't know you can have a career in distressed investing, in turnarounds. Like it's not on most curriculums, even in business school. So how is your memoir? How is you going and you sort of doing this book tour, helping to at least get the word out and inspire other young people, those maybe they're getting their MBAs or even undergraduate, to aspire to get into our industry?
Yes, well, it's not just for young people, as you know. It covers my whole life, and what it uses is anecdotes of some of the interesting characters I've had dealings with, and tries to draw from them conclusions, recommendations that could help people at whatever stage they are. And in addition, I think the anecdotes are fun. I think you certainly seem to enjoy them.
Well, I got a sneak peek last year, before it was out, and certainly I wish actually you wrote this 30 years ago, because I would have certainly been able to know what to expect in some of these situations.
Right. Well, if you can roll the clock back, you found a new wonderful career.
Yeah, no, that's great. But certainly, I would highly recommend everybody to get your memoir. It's called Risks and Returns: Creating Success in Business and Life, and I'm sure we'll be putting it up on the screen for those of you who are watching the video portion of this podcast. Wilbur will also be with us at our next Distressed Investing and Turnaround Awards event, which we've been having in Palm Beach for the last, I think, 18, 19 years. Wilbur, if you could think, it just goes very quickly. And for those of you who are inclined to be there, will be recognized. There's only a few hundred people. But Wilbur will be hosting us in his backyard at his estate in Palm Beach, and we'll be talking about what's at least the first 100 days of Trump 2.0.
Right.
Yeah. So let's just go right into it, right? So let's start out with Trump 2.0. This seems like a much different president than we had in 2016. I think he thought a lot about what he would do in those 4 years that he says, if I ever got back in there, I'm doing this very differently. Your take on that?
Well, that's certainly true. Remember, with Trump 1.0, he had never been in public office, not let alone president. He'd never been in any kind of public office. So it took a while to get to understand how Washington works. If you think about it, Washington, in a sense, is the world's largest conglomerate because it's the nerve center of the entire country and arguably of the entire world. And its various departments have literally millions of workers in them. So it's a huge thing just to get your arms around and understand how it works. And then the Congress is a whole separate thing that also is complicated to work with, but it's very important, obviously, to do so because any major changes require congressional approval. So the first thing is he understands now not only how complicated this is, but perhaps more importantly, how to deal with it, how to fix it. And I think it was a brilliant move to call in Elon Musk. I'm a big Musk admirer, and I think Musk not only played a very good role in winning the young adult vote for Trump, but more is really front and center in the turnaround of the U.S. government.
Yeah. And he learned a lot about that in executing very similar things that he's doing now when he bought Twitter.
Right. Well, Twitter, he eliminated something like 80% of the staff very, very quickly. And while Twitter has had some other problems, I noticed that the huge amount of debt that he incurred has now found buyers. Originally, the syndicate took it on their own balance sheet, Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and the others. Now they've apparently been able to make a very successful secondary offering of it. So it didn't take much too long to turn Twitter around.
We covered that in the M&A alerts. I think the banks kind of were, if they wanted to do business with Elon Musk, they needed to support him with his Twitter acquisition.
Right.
So he leveraged that, and then he started cutting everything, and then they realized, oh my gosh, are we going to make money on? Are we going to get these loans? And then, his profile, I'm saying his tutelage, if you will, his mentor of Donald, who was his mentor of like, this is how you should appear in the public to raise your brand value, right? And I think, he's pulling a page out of sort of Trump's PR page.
Well, in a sense, that's true.
That Elon Musk needs to, essentially. But I'm just saying that.
But this is not just a PR stunt. This is real.
Right.
It's substantive. It's real. It's being done with breathtaking speed. To the amazement.
Let's talk about that.
Everybody.
Let's talk about that, because in the turnaround distress world, you need to do things fast, right? You have to stop the bleeding.
Right.
So for the longest time, decades, we've been talking that we have to stop the bleeding of the U.S. government, but no one did it, right?
That's correct. And I think in a very interesting reason, for a cabinet secretary to tear apart his own department and then try to have a civilized relationship long-term with the staff would be pretty hard, given the ingrained nature of the people in Washington. So the idea of bringing in someone who's not actually in the government and who will not have ongoing responsibility for managing the department, I think was a brilliant way to do it. In effect, he brought in a turnaround consultant to the government.
Right. The quote-unquote unelected official, but anybody's going to be unelected to do this, right? So to come and do this.
Now, the big difference here also,
go ahead.
Big difference here is he's doing it pro bono.
Right.
That's the other amazing part about it.
Yeah. He doesn't need it. He doesn't need to be paid for this. But it's gonna help him and all of his companies in the long term, I think, right? Just his sort of, and look, I think at the end of the day, and no matter what I think at your politics is, this takes a lot of guts to do, number one. Number two, it just shows that, they're on a mission and they care.
Yes, and the other thing remarkable about the way Musk has gone about it is he's had a few senior people in the picture, but mostly he's using very young people, very smart, very determined, and very capable, but relatively inexperienced young people. So what seems to be happening is the kind of gray-haired ones in his group are laying out for the young people fairly specifically what they should be going after, and then they go out and actually get it done. So it's an interesting structure for an advisory firm, which is what he really has created.
And why is he doing it that way? Yes, they're smart, but I would think there are very smart, more experienced people out there as well.
Well, there are, but I'm not so sure that if you're trying to break all the molds, it isn't better to start with people who aren't wedded to one mold or another, or don't have a history with it. If you brought in someone who's been consulting with the government, they probably will have fairly fixed notions what should be done. This way, what Musk is saying, let's get the data, let's get to the underlying facts, and wherever those lead us, that's what we're going to do. And as you'll see, they've come up with some incredible uses of money. It's hard to imagine how some of these things got approved by anybody in the first place.
Yeah.
So I think it was very important to have new eyes looking at everything. And lo and behold, they're finding a lot of stuff.
Yeah. So this is a lesson, right, for all of us, even running companies, turnarounds, distress, bring in people that won't have their own personal or professional biases, right? Because they just don't know any better.
Right.
Just to have a fresh new set of people who weren't trained or inculcated in anyone else's culture, especially a government culture. Oh, well, this is the way it works, right? So
Right.
you kind of resigned to it, bringing fresh people who possibly never worked for government before, young or maybe young people who were in the government got frustrated and said, "Look, this is crazy. Let's go after the problem. Let's solve the problem and not have to worry about everything else."
Right. Now, one big difference, though, between this and a corporate turnaround is he's not trying to change the agenda. When a corporate turnaround, you very often have to change the business model, think differently about the nature of the business. Here, all he's saying is, I'm only addressing things that are wasteful, things where too much is being spent, and I'm dealing with that. I'm not saying that you should make rockets this way or that way. So it's a
Right.
different, it's a narrower assignment in some ways. And I think that's part of why having relatively inexperienced people do it works. If you were trying to change the whole direction of a company, you really need to know something about business, probably should know something about the industry in order
Right.
to make the strategic decisions. What he's making are basically tactical decisions, not strategic ones.
Right. So waste, fraud, and abuse, anything
Right.
that looks remotely like that, bring it to our attention, right?
Right, exactly. So it's a more limited
And
assignment.
you were in the government.
Sure.
You ran the largest, I would say. I mean, what was the budget of the Commerce Department?
Oh, God, many tens of billions of dollars, and very
Yeah.
complicated in that we had everything from 16 space satellites that we managed to the Census Bureau, to the Patent and Trademark Bureau, to the Business Bureau of Economic Analysis, to God knows, it's a very, very complicated situation. And there is some room for fat cutting there. And I've spent a fair amount of time with some of Musk's people and with Howard Lutnick, who's my successor, giving him my recommendations, what could be done.
Yeah, they can't. Did Musk's team and Lutnick come to you for any guidance?
Well, I've known Lutnick for a long time, for about 40 years. In fact, when he was getting into real estate services, I sold him one of the mortgage servicing businesses that he bought. So I've done business with him, and I like Howard, and I know him. And he did an amazing job. Talk about turnaround. Cantor Fitzgerald, for all practical purpose, was wiped off the face of the earth by 9/11, including Howard's younger brother, who died in the tragedy. And the only reason Howard himself didn't get killed by it is it was his son's first day at kindergarten, and so he was taking the boy to school. Otherwise, he'd have been gone too. But he has now made Cantor much more powerful than it ever was when Bernie Cantor, who was the founder, was around. So we know he knows how to build something. We know he knows how to deal with something that was really badly wiped out and yet fix it, move it in a whole bunch of creative new directions. So it's a very interesting combination. You could sort of say that Musk's role is that of the surgeon and Trump's role is that of the rehabilitation therapist.
Mm-hmm. Wow, the speed at which where they're doing this. What do you? I mean, this is where maybe in the 20-somethingth day now. I mean, it feels like he's been president for 3 years already.
Well, he's accomplished a huge amount, and he really needs to. And here is why. Right now, as the newly elected president is very popular, very powerful, both in terms of the world and in terms of the Congress and the public, the voters. So that will gradually wear off as time goes. But more importantly, whatever he doesn't get done, more or less by the end of September, will be very hard to get congressional approval of anything very dramatic, because they will all be focusing on the midterm elections next year, and therefore they're not going to do anything particularly controversial. So in a very real sense, he needs to move fast, but he needs to do it for another reason. Anybody who's gone through mass layoffs of a business or, for that matter, a political organization, the right way to do it is one big bang. The wrong way to do it is string it out over a 2-year period.
Right.
Because if you string it out, everybody is worried, well, will I be the next to go? And what tends to happen is you get adverse selection of personnel, in that the good people aren't going to hang around for 2 years in a murky situation. They'll find employment elsewhere. So that's the other reason he doesn't want to lose the good people. And there are plenty of good people in government. One should not get the notion from what's going on right now that they're all lazy, that they're all bad, that they're all crooks. That's not true. There are a lot of very dedicated, very serious people trying their best to do a very good job. It's just they've been entrapped in a horribly dysfunctional system, a highly dysfunctional environment. So I think we shouldn't overlook the fact that there are plenty of good people in the government.
Yeah. You used to be a Democrat, coming from New York. What are Democrats doing now? I mean, besides just, shouting about how bad Elon Musk is, not focused in on, hey, they found all this fraud. What a great thing, right? They're reporting on and complaining about Elon Musk.
Well, remember, they really thought they were going to win the election. So the first shock they've had to adjust to is simply the fact of it now being Trump 2.0. So they were not even recovering from that. And then along comes this cold wind from the north in the form of Elon Musk. And so they're a little bit reeling. I don't think they quite recognize how to think their way through a new program. I'm sure they will. They're keenly aware that the midterm elections are coming up next year, so they'll have to get some sort of a program together. But so far, all they're doing is complaining mostly about process issues, saying, well, this isn't right. Musk wasn't elected by anybody. Well, it's true. Neither is any cabinet member elected. They're appointed, and they're appointed by the president, just as Musk was. So they're talking about process issues there. They're also talking about, is all of this something that the president can do without congressional approval? Because so far, these big programs that he's put in have been totally done by the executive branch. And some of them at some point, I'm sure, will need to be ratified by the Congress. So they're complaining mostly about process issues. It's hard to complain about the actual decisions that have been made
Merits.
because I think the public has seen enough to understand those are pretty good. So the other thing they're complaining about is the hardship that this is reaping in a number of foreign countries, particularly less developed countries. And that's their other thing, is complaining about starving children here and there. Well, that certainly isn't the intent of the program. The intent is simply to get rid of the fraud, get rid of the waste in delivering the services. But they're in a tough spot in that Trump does have a real public mandate. The polls are enormously favorable to what he's doing, both in terms of the border and in terms of cutting out waste.
Yeah. Well, let's get into that. I mean, I think some of the things you were referring to was perhaps the closing or reduction of the agency USAID. Was that under the Commerce, or was that
No?
Where was that agency?
No,
Where's that agency?
USAID was a separate agency. It was not part of Commerce.
Okay. Now they're throwing it under the State Department. Marco Rubio, I think, now is
Right.
the effective head of it.
Right.
But
It was always very involved with state because its mandate was mostly overseas.
Okay. I see. Okay. Well, listen. Let's talk about tariffs. I think, being the Commerce Secretary, I think you did a lot of tariff during Trump 1, and he's learned it even more as a tool. Academics and economists are going to talk about that. You put in the tariff on, inflation's going to go through the roof. But your experience and Trump's experience in the first term was, of course, overall inflation did not go through the roof.
Right.
And so now it's sort of yesterday's news was it's sort of, whatever you're charging us as a tariff, we'll do it reciprocally.
Right. Now, we don't know the details of how the reciprocal tariffs will really work, but it could very well be, if they make them on a floating scale where, let's say, the average realized tariff in a given country now is 10% on our goods. If they say, okay, we'll match that, but if you cut the average to us, from 10 to 9 will go down, and 10 to 8 will go down. Similarly, if you raise them on us, will go up. So I think, depending on how they orchestrate it, the reciprocal tariffs could actually lead to lower tariffs for everybody, because now the countries would have a specific incentive to cut their tariffs to us in order to get automatically some tariff relief from us. That's never been part of the international tariff picture, and so it's potentially a game changer. because at the end of the day, when you think about it, what do we really want? What we really want is a level playing field. We don't want subsidies. We don't want tariff barriers. We don't want non-tariff barriers. So it's quite possible that the sort of shock therapy of putting tariff on everything from everybody to us, it's quite possible that that will have a very positive longer-term outcome. For the
So
moment,
in a sense, it could become deflationary because all the other tariffs might come down. You're saying,
yeah, no, I'm certainly not guaranteeing that that will happen,
right?
not even forecasting that it's the most likely, but it's the first application I've seen of tariffs that has the potential for ending up with tariffs lower rather than higher.
Yeah. So it seems that Trump is using the tariffs certainly to light a fire under countries to come to the negotiating table, right? Just, hey,
Yeah.
25% Canada, 25% Mexico. It seems like to be an effective negotiation tool.
Well, it's a very big tool because those countries' economies really can't afford the gigantic tariffs. Their exports to the U.S. are so large relative to their economies that they would be pushed into very serious recession, maybe even depression,
Right.
if he had to go through with it. So I'm glad to see that they seem to an outsider, like they're taking them seriously and making some reforms. But what's novel is this is the first time I know of where use of tariffs has been put into place in order to modify behavior of the government in sectors that have nothing to do with normal tariffs, namely border control and fentanyl control. So it's doing quite a few unique things with tariffs. And he's building on the pioneering that we did was figuring out how you can find some legislation that exists but gives the president a lot of power to do tariffs. And that was the Section 232, the Section 301, all these sections that we found in other legislation. So what he's doing now would not have been possible in tariffs if we hadn't found these legal things and if they hadn't been tested. For example,
Yeah.
my steel tariffs were taken all the way up to the Supreme Court. So one of the advantages he has in Trump 2.0 is now he knows what tools he has, and he's got a pretty good idea how to use them. So the knowledge base that he has is so superior, and the toolbox that he has is so superior to what he had last time that that's what facilitates all this activity.
Why do these economists, whether they're from Harvard or maybe that says it right there, but why are they so academic about this? Is it just because there hasn't been anybody who utilized tariffs in such a way?
Well, economists really deal with theory more than they do with practicality, is my bottom line. And the theory of free trade is a nice theory that each country would make and export whatever it was best at doing, and then it would import whatever it was worst at doing. And that all sounds fine. The problem is that once you interject human beings, everybody wants his economy to grow faster, And therefore, everybody tries to figure out how can I manipulate tariffs or whatever in order to facilitate more rapid growth in my country. So the problem with the economic theory is that it doesn't match human behavior.
Well, Trump is obviously utilizing both military and our consumer economy as leverage tools
Right,
to affect policy, right? To affect
right,
all of
right,
these things. And you did a lot of this sort of early scut work, if you will, in the first administration,
right.
and tested the boundaries there. So if you weren't trying to figure things out there, he may not have gotten to where he is, and you really utilize. I mean, tariff is, I just on the campaign trail, he says, "Look, I'm going to redefine the word tariff for you, right? I'm going to tell you
Well,
what it is."
right. Well, and he did.
Yeah.
No, it's he sees he noticed an opportunity, a real series of opportunities. He seized upon them, and he has really put them to play. Now it's too early to tell whether it'll work out as well as we think it will, but I'm cautiously optimistic that he's going to get a tremendous amount of mileage done.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Let's talk about border security, and then talk about the wars around the world and what Trump is doing. Certainly just in the first few weeks here. He ran on illegal immigration into the United States. He said largest deportation effort ever in the United States. That's what he promised. Your thoughts?
Well, Homan's, his border czar, is sort of Hollywood typecast to be the border guy. I mean, he looks like a cop, he sounds like a cop, he's very determined, very energetic.
Did you work with him in the first term?
No, not
Or did you
really, not really.
Okay.
No, he wasn't really at the level. But the amount that he has accomplished compared with when Kamala Harris was the border czar, as far as I know, she never made more than one or two ceremonial trips to the border. She never really took any action. This guy, before he was even confirmed, was effectively running the Border Patrol. Now, that was assisted by the fact that the members of the Customs and Border Patrol, clearly favored this direction, so he didn't have any resistance from within the department. Whereas some of the other changes that Trump is making in other departments, the people in the department are not in favor of. So that's a harder task. But I think what he's done is amazing. I hope it doesn't come to the point where he's going to have to put in jail a lot of mayors and governors for interfering with law enforcement. But from what I can take of him, I think he's fully capable of doing that if it's necessary. I think he's extremely determined to get this task done.
Yeah. Now, the new Attorney General, Pam Bondi, is suing the states of Illinois and New York for their policies and laws that go against the federal government regarding immigration.
That's right. That's right. But I don't think she's brought criminal actions. I think what she's brought are civil actions.
Okay. And do you think that's going to have any effect, or is it more of a PR type of thing?
Well, the courts will ultimately make a decision, and however the lower courts decide will undoubtedly go all the way up to the Supreme Court. So it's going to be quite a while, in all likelihood, before we know the outcome of that.
Yeah. Is it, sanctuary cities like New York City, Chicago, is it, I think the Trump administration said they'll potentially hold back federal funds if they don't comply. Is that
Well, they have been. New York, they grabbed back, I don't know, $50 million that had been spent on hotels. Yeah, right. Um, yeah. Um, well, yes, it is. It is around the corner. It's right by Grand Central Station. Um, it's, um, I don't know what'll be the outcome. I do think it's a little ridiculous, the amount of money that's been spent on illegal migrants is much more in some cases than we're spending on Americans who are poor people. And I don't think that makes much sense. But this is going to be a big legal shootout. And Pam Biondi,
Yeah, that was from FEMA, right? Roosevelt Hotel. That used to be a nice place, but then that's around the corner from the Yale Club, I think.
well, she's a very, very attractive woman, is a very good, very determined attorney general. She did a wonderful job as attorney general down here in Florida, and she's a tough cookie. So there, Trump picked a very good person for that job.
Right. Looks like Trump is, he knows how. Again, just the contrast from the first term, he learned a lot. He knows all the levers, right? He knows all the, and when the Justice Department came after him, he's like, okay, let's see how they're using it. Let me use it as well for my priorities, which is immigration and those sorts of things. Let's talk about the wars, around the world. Looks like Trump is the only leader that, stood up and is saying, hey, let's put an end to all of these things. Let's talk about Gaza. Did you ever talk about like, hey, that could be the Riviera of the Middle East? Did you ever have that conversation with him?
Yeah. No. In fact, I've never been in Gaza, so I don't have much of a comment on it. But he knows his real estate, so he probably has a pretty good notion. But I don't think the key is whether Gaza becomes a big resort area. I think he is bound and determined to go with haste to end both wars. He hates the idea of all this killing, and he's really moving to try to end it. So it's a work in progress. It's harder to measure because so much of it is undoubtedly being done in conference rooms rather than in the press room. So it's a little bit too early to tell how he'll come out. But he is certainly going to use every weapon available to him to make this happen.
He speaks plainly, which I think the American people like, which is, look, we'll step up because all these Arab countries are not, right? Well, where's their leadership? They should be stepping up and taking care of this. But if they don't, well, we'll just come in and we'll make things happen there. And then, of course, there's, okay, yeah, maybe we should be doing something.
Yeah, well, I would say I'm not an expert in the Mideast, but it's clear that he's using whatever leverage he can find on whomever he can approach in order to bring a very rapid end to the war. And that's one of the big differences between this administration and the Biden administration. Biden administration had a great deal of difficulty making decisions, and then when they made them, they tended to temporize. They would supply weapons to Ukraine, but say, but you can't use them wherever you want. You can only use them here and there. And they didn't necessarily give them the best weapons to begin with. So Trump tends to go all out. If he's trying to get something done, he'll pull all the strings he can. So it's a different philosophical approach. And he's not as worried as Biden apparently was about escalation. I think his feeling is that there's really not going to be big escalation because we're so powerful that if we're really determined, we can make things happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So is that his similar approach, it seems, that he's doing with, Russia and Ukraine? Hey, I'm just picking up the phone and calling Vladimir Putin. We're doing the rest of this via phone, but this is all good, Wilbur. Thanks for your time. We were wrapping up with sort of the Ukraine, Russia, Trump contacting Vladimir Putin directly. He's stepping up, showing some leadership, and whereas the rest of Europe, I don't think Putin is returning their call. So, what do you think about that?
Well, I think several things. He clearly is using everything he can think of to bring an end to the warfare in those places, but he's also making clear to Europe that the days of the free ride on NATO are over with. During Trump 1.0, we had trouble getting the NATO countries even up to the 2%. That was the objective, 2% of GDP on defense spending. Now he's pushing for them to go much further. And I think that's only fair. Why should we be at a higher percentage of our GDP than they are of theirs? Now, we will still be spending more than they do because our GDP is bigger, but there's no particular reason why we should be directly subsidizing them.
Yeah. Yeah. So pay your fair share, basically. And especially, what Trump says is, look, your defense in Europe should be much more important to you than to the United States. We'll support it, but your defense should be much more important to you. There.
Well, he's right about that.
Yeah.
He's right about that, and I'm sure that it will result in some increase in their spending because they don't really have an alternative.
Right. Anything else you want to mention, talk about? It's only been 3 weeks into the Trump administration. I think they've not only hit the ground running, but it feels like they've already went through 3 years of
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
That's certainly true. No, I think you've covered pretty much everything, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more happening between now and the time of the conference.
Yep.
So we'll just have to see, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of updates that we can give at the conference.
Yeah, no, and everybody who's attending the event will get a copy of Wilbur Ross's Risks and Returns, Creating Success in Business and Life, your memoir, and you'll be they'll all be signed. And we, we're looking forward to to that. We're looking forward to, and thank you again for being a great friend of the M&A Advisor, not only with our podcasts, with our events, but also certainly hosting at your estate in Palm Beach, and that overlooks you. You're on the intercoastal side, right? You're on the one that.
Yes,
Yep.
we are.
Yep.
And you can actually, even though it's a fair distance, they'll actually be able to see where Mar-a-Lago is.
Okay. Well, hopefully, unless the Mar-a-Lago people quadrupled the price of a cocktail party over there, maybe you can help us get there. Have one of our events, maybe next year at the the Trump Winter White House.
I think they're in such demand they can charge whatever they
Yeah,
want.
it's incredible. We were there for 3 years in advance of him becoming president, but after he became president, it was just outrageously like, well, you can't make money on this unless you're running a huge fundraiser or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Look, Mar-a-Lago is the center of the universe now.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of things have been going over there. You've been attending any good parties over there? I guess the inauguration.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is party season in Palm Beach in general. But anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
the one thing, Roger, if you're going to have around 250 people, if it rains, I don't know what we'll do because I can't accommodate 250 inside the house.
All right. Well,
figure that out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. We'll limit it to the people. It's the opening cocktail. We're gonna make sure that people are registered for the event and make sure that they're coming and all of that other kind of stuff. So no, we do certainly appreciate all of that. We'll have numbers closer to the event, maybe at least 2 to 3 weeks out. So we'll have a much better idea on that stuff. We are also looking to, have a fireside chat with you the next day during the event. Where we'll talk Trump 2.0 and, the first 75, 80 days, which, if it's anything like the first, 20 some odd days, I would think what we talked about on this podcast might be irrelevant by then.
Well, it could be. Certainly we'll know a lot more about what's happening internationally.
Yeah. Wilbur, thank you for your time. You've been very generous, and I look forward to seeing you in person in a few weeks.
Okay, good to talk with you, Rob.
Okay, bye, Wilbur. Take care. We hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new from it. If you have any questions or comments for us or any of our guests, please feel free to leave them in the podcast platform of your choice or send us an email at editor@maadvisor.com. We would love to hear from you and get your feedback. And if you haven't done so already, please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and subscribe to our M&A Alerts newsletter at the links in the description or on our website at www.maadvisor.com. This will help you stay updated on the latest M&A interviews and trends and support our podcast to grow and reach more listeners like you. This is Roger Aguinaldo, the creator and founder of the M&A Advisor. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our M&A Advisor community. Until next time, stay safe and happy dealing.